Hey everybody, this is Ben Schneider, host of the Photo Finish on Scot Radio, and this podcast was recorded about 24 hours, just a little more than 24 hours after the finish to the 2020 Daytona 500. And since this podcast was recorded, we have received the best possible news and updates we could have possibly heard regarding Ryan Newman. On Wednesday, he was released from Halifax Medical Center entirely, walking out under his own power with his two daughters. And that is quite frankly miraculous. We did not know this at the time of the recording of this show. I'm still going to upload this and post it, but I want to let you guys know that I really didn't have a script for the first half of this show. I really just kind of spoke from the heart and gave my thoughts on the culture of NASCAR right now, the state that it's in, and how I believe we've created rules and an idea that we need to be entertained to the point where we accept that these massive accidents are commonplace, and because injuries are so incredibly rare, we don't think much about it. And I think that Newman's accident was a big wake-up call to everybody in the NASCAR community, and we really need to think about where do we go from here, and what changes do we need to make to prevent something like this from happening again. I'm also going to recap Speed Weeks, the ARCA race, Trucks, Xfinity, Daytona, the Clash, the Duels, all of that. So I hope you all enjoy the show. Let's get right into it. Good evening, and welcome to the Photo Finish, Scot Radio's home for motorsports. I'm your host, Ben Schneider, and if you're a racing fan, you've undoubtedly been following along the last 24 hours with the aftermath of the Daytona 500. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I did not know this morning if I was going to come in and do this show. This is a very sensitive topic. Major accidents like this are always the hardest thing that we have to go through in the motorsports community as drivers, as teams, as fans, as media, as whoever. I'm going to do my best to be as respectful as I can. I do want to cover as much of Speed Weeks as possible. And I also want to obviously send my thoughts and prayers out to Ryan Newman and his family as he continues to recover. But this is a very sensitive issue. I want to make something very clear here. I think we have a problem in NASCAR right now. I've sat here in this studio on multiple occasions, and I've talked about how I'm tired of gimmicks. I'm tired of stage racing, playoff points, but even long before those are very recent changes. I'm not a fan, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a fan of double file restarts. I prefer the old way we do it, where we start 2x2 at the start of the race, and then from there on after, it's single file restarts with lap cars in the inside lane, and the lead lap cars in single file on the outside. We went to double file restarts in 2009. We started green-white checkers or overtime or whatever, and that's gone through several changes and tweaks and iterations itself. I'm not a fan of any of that. I prefer my racing to play out naturally. If a race is called the Daytona 500, I think it should end at 500 miles. And that goes across the board in NASCAR. NASCAR is not a timed sport, so the concept of overtime to begin with, I think, is unnecessary. In stick and ball sports, you have an overtime, or in baseball's case, extra innings, because the game is tied. You need to declare a winner. I don't know. The Indy 500 has ended under caution multiple times. There was a period from 2010 to 2013, 4 years in a row, it ended under yellow. I don't recall very many IndyCar fans begging IndyCar to implement overtime so that the Indy 500 could get a green flag finish. If we have a green flag finish, that's great. If not, it's the Indianapolis 500. It's over after 200 laps. That's just my opinion. But the big problem that I think we have here is that you look at all of these things, almost every single one of these, for lack of better terms, gimmicks that I've thrown out that no other major motorsports series does. What do they all have in common? Double file restarts lead to more exciting racing, arguably. Over time, a green flag finish that leads to closer, more exciting racing. Artificially throwing cautions at the end of stages to award points to break up the race. Remember about a decade ago when Bruton Smith was floating the idea out about mandatory cautions? He'd like to see mandatory cautions. It was universally laughed at, denounced, and everybody said, no way. That's ludicrous. It's absurd. It makes no sense. We have a saying in racing that cautions breed cautions. And so what happens when you throw two cautions artificially in the middle of a race? What happens when there's a late accident or late debris caution or whatever the caution is for, and you say, we want a green flag finish, so we're going to try to get a green flag finish and have an overtime period. And we're going to line them up double wide, too. I mean, all of this just creates the possibility for more wrecks. And now with the unlimited overtime rules, if we don't get to the white flag, then we line them up and we try again. It's all so unnecessary to me. And I understand we're not doing 200 miles an hour most race weekends. I understand that NASCAR, and let me give credit where it's due, NASCAR safety has come a long, long, long way in the last 20 years, since the death of Dale Earnhardt in particular. But I just see it, even if we don't hurt anybody. I've never been a fan of superspeedway racing. I'm not saying it's a lottery crapshoot. Anybody can win. I absolutely think there's skill involved. I mean, you look at Denny Hamlin winning his second Daytona 500 in a row in 3 of the last 5 years. I don't think that's any accident. I think he's one of the best superspeedway racers we have on the circuit right now. But it kills me every year. And it's gotten particularly bad. I still remember watching the very first NASCAR race ever with stages, or the first Cup race at least, 2017. Caution after caution after caution after caution. And I see all of these crunched up race cars lying in the infield after these massive accidents. And I see budgets going up in smoke. And my heart especially hurts for the small teams. I guess the exciting thing about plate racing for a lot of people, and myself included, I'm guilty of this as well. I don't know if guilty is the right word, but I like seeing underdogs do well. Daytona and Talladega are the most likely place you're going to see that, just because of how the nature of a draft and pack racing works. But it's also the most likely place where you're going to be in a crash, not of your own doing. And when I see these small teams with what is quite possibly their only race car, or one of only a handful of race cars they have, getting destroyed, how do you recover from that? The purse money for finishing in the 30s is not going to do anything. How do you come back from that? So I think part of the issue, I really don't have a script for you guys. I'm speaking from the heart here, so forgive me if I have long pauses here. We have created a culture in NASCAR where we are in the business of entertainment almost as much, if not more, than we are the business of motorsports. And call it a hot take if you want to. That's just how I see it. I don't think you can deny that if you look at it hard enough. Just the idea that we have to have 4 drivers going into the championship race with a shot at the championship. I don't know. Lewis Hamilton has clinched the championship in Formula One each of the last 3 years before Abu Dhabi. Most F1 fans are still watching Abu Dhabi as far as I'm concerned. It's not as tense or exciting because there isn't the prospect of a champion being crowned, but it doesn't mean the diehard fans are not going to watch it. But the 1992 Hooters 500 has 6 drivers going into the championship fight, or eligible for the championship mathematically, going into the final race. And 22 years later, NASCAR decides we want to guarantee that every year. It screams artificial to me. It screams a desire for Game 7 style edge-of-your-seat entertainment. And I think you have to look at how NASCAR has marketed itself, and not to throw all the blame on NASCAR here. I think Fox and NBC are two media partners, are equally as guilty of this. Maybe Fox a little bit more than NBC, but I don't want to let NBC off the hook entirely either. If you go look up a NASCAR commercial, tell me when you find a NASCAR commercial made in the last 10 or 15 years that does not have a massive accident in it. I don't know. Maybe there's one that's slipped my mind, but I've got a feeling you're going to be searching for a while. We've marketed the big crashes because we've gotten to this point where we're so used to seeing, Austin Dillon goes into the catch fence at Daytona 2015. The front of the car is ripped off the rear of the car. Larson goes into the catch fence in the Xfinity race a few years prior. They both hop right out. And we look at that and we say, wow, these cars are incredibly safe. And they are. But we also think, if that's not going to hurt a driver, what will? So we look at these accidents and we say, nobody got hurt in this massive wreck. We're not going to feel bad throwing it on a commercial and marketing it and trying to draw people in that way. And then first of all, if all you watch NASCAR for is for the crashes, I'm sorry. I would not consider you a real fan. If that's all the entertainment you're getting out of the sport, you either are not interested to a full extent, or you don't truly care. You just want to be entertained. So I feel like when we prioritize crashes in marketing our sport, any casual viewers that we might draw in are going to expect to see those crashes every race. And then if we have a clean race, any potential to draw that fan in goes away, because you've created this expectation among somebody who doesn't know better that we see these massive accidents and it's exciting and it's terrifying, but everybody walks away all the time, so it's nothing to be scared of. But that's not reality, and it's also ethically questionable. And it's ethically questionable because this is inherently a dangerous sport. NASCAR has not had a fatality in its top 3 divisions since Dale Earnhardt in 2001. It has not had a fatality, period, since 2009 with Carlos Pardo in the Mexico Series. I think we've become numb and taken for granted just how dangerous what these guys and girls that strap into those seatbelts and in those race cars every week, just how dangerous it is. You can build safer cars, you can build safer walls, you can build safer tracks, but it's never going to be 100% safe and make you invincible. I want to flash back just over 24 hours now. Undoubtedly, if you're a race fan, You've seen what's happened by now. You know, Ryan Newman was leading coming into the trial on the final lap. of an overtime finish, multiple overtime attempts, and bump drafting gone wrong from Ryan Blaney. I'm not blaming Ryan Blaney, and let me be very, very clear. I'm not blaming Blaney, Newman, Denny Hamlin, Corey LaJoie, who hit Newman. I'm not blaming anybody for this. This was a racing accident. Trying to win the Daytona 500, the style of racing we've created, I don't blame any of the drivers for this. It's absolutely ridiculous to me that we would play that game right now. Newman gets hooked, gets turned, car goes airborne. As he is airborne, he is struck by Corey LaJoie, still going 190 miles an hour, right in the cockpit area, and continues to slide down the track on his roof until he comes to a complete stop with the fuel tank leaking and a small fire underneath the car. I've never been that terrified while watching a NASCAR race. I saw Dan Wheldon's fatal crash live on TV in the IndyCar series. That is the only time I can think of where I've been watching a motorsports event and felt how I felt last night. Just absolutely sick to my stomach and fearing the worst. If you are watching this after the fact on YouTube, out of respect for the Newman family, I know it's out there. If you want to see the crash, if you want to take a look at it, see what happened, you will have no problem finding it. I'm not going to post any pictures or video here. I know a lot of people have. I think Fox did prematurely. That's just not who I am. That's just not what I want to do. So I'm not going to do it. But Ryan Newman did not get out of the car. I know some people probably expected him to, given NASCAR's clean track record the last 2 decades. But it was very serious. It is very serious. He was assisted out of the car. They had to cut part of the car away to get him out. The safety team put up black screens around the scene to prevent spectators from being able to see. They told media to leave pit road, and none of that is ever a good sign. This was clearly a very serious accident. I do want to give an update. This is the latest update we have from Roush Fenway Racing, the team Newman drives for. Ryan Newman remains under the care of doctors at the Halifax Medical Center in Daytona Beach, Florida. He is awake and speaking with family and doctors. Ryan and his family have expressed their appreciation for the concern and heartfelt messages from across the country. They are grateful for the unwavering support of the NASCAR community and beyond. We will continue to provide information as it becomes available. Praise God. That's all I can say. Praise God. The official statement from Steve O'Donnell of NASCAR last night was that Newman's injuries are serious but not life-threatening. Personally, I've never heard that phrase together, but I want to be very clear. I've seen a lot of people on social media relieved, and rightfully so. This is, if you've seen the accident, this is the best possible news that we could have right now. But I've seen a lot of, thank God Newman's okay, thank God Newman is going to be all right. We know he's alive. We don't know much more beyond that. We don't know if this is a head injury. We don't know. We don't know what it is. I want to be very, very clear here that I am not going to try to speculate anything. I don't want anybody to believe anything, if it's not coming from NASCAR, from Roush, or from the Newman family, or a highly respected journalist such as a Bob Pockrass or a Jeff Gluck. If it's coming from anybody else, take it with a grain of salt, to say the least. But this is, to be quite honest, miraculous. This is the closest call we've had in NASCAR in a long time. And I can only hope and pray that this is the wake-up call we need. Because I've seen what has happened to superspeedway racing. I've seen the demolition derby that it has become. Maybe some of you even listening to this, probably think it's entertaining, probably think it's great racing, think it's fun to watch, think we don't need to change it. I respect your opinion, but I would respectfully disagree. What we see at Daytona and Talladega these days is, I'm just going to be real and blunt here with you guys, it's unacceptable. I know that ever since the restrictor plates came on the cars, we've seen big accidents in pack racing. I understand that is a part of racing in the draft, but something has to change. We're seeing more of these, I feel like we're seeing more of these big accidents per race now than we saw per season, even as recently as 5-10 years ago, before we had the stages. I'm not blaming the stages for the uprise in these massive wrecks entirely, but I do think they are part of the problem. There's not one thing I can pinpoint. It's just a constant... It's a constant need to have entertainment over good quality racing, or thinking that we're going to artificially create exciting racing over the basic concept of motorsports that I think has damaged NASCAR's brand. And if you don't believe me, I would just encourage you to look at the ratings, look at the attendance, look at all the Fortune 500 companies that were sponsoring cars 10 years ago but are no longer in the sport for one reason or another. Jimmy Johnson is a legend. He is a 7-time champion. If Lowe's is not getting a credible enough return on investment to continue to finance and back Hendrick for a guy who's one of the faces of the sport, one of its biggest names, if Jimmy can't keep his sponsors, how can anyone else? The full season sponsorship deals have gone the way of the dodo bird. You don't see the same company on one race car for every race. Now, I think Ally Bank with Jimmy is probably the only exception. Even Kyle Busch, who's arguably with Jimmy, one of the top two biggest superstars in NASCAR right now, he has a massive deal with Mars and M&M's, but he also has Interstate Batteries on the car for a few races. He has other sponsorship deals coming in here and there. It's not how it used to be. We have a problem here. And I think, unfortunately, it was always going to take somebody getting seriously hurt or killed to wake us up. You know, that's normally, unfortunately, how these things go. Dale Earnhardt's death woke everybody up, and there was a clear message sent out from the moment that happened that this must never happen again. And thankfully, so far it hasn't, and we continue to pray and hope that it never will again. But what we saw last night is a reminder, a not-so-gentle reminder, that we cannot take the lives of our favorite drivers and competitors for granted. I really want to see some change or some announcement from NASCAR that we're going to do something to fix this. And don't get me wrong. Like I said, I want to credit NASCAR where it's due for its safety innovations. I know that Newman's car is already, if it's not there, it's on the way to R&D, and they're going to tear it down and break down the crash and get into the sciences and look at every possible angle and analyze this down to the last possible degree to see what went right, what went wrong, how this can be prevented in the future, how we can try to keep the cars on the ground. Again, that's not always possible, but we can never stop improving. And I think last night was a reminder that we all needed that is the case. We have not been on the air since last December. I know last year when we came back for a new season, we broke a lot of off-season, silly season news. We're getting started a little bit later than we were last year. So if you're a race fan, you know the major stories that have broken. I just want to focus on Speed Weeks and focus on it very briefly because obviously it's not the main topic of discussion tonight. Like I said, I was considering not even doing the show tonight, but I've seen a lot of people on YouTube do their shows, put out videos. Dale Earnhardt Jr. did his podcast today with Kyle Larson as his guest. If Dale Jr. is doing his podcast, that's good enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and do mine. So I want to cover some things in brief, and I'll start with the Rolex 24. 24 Hours of Daytona, which happened a few weeks ago now. Wayne Taylor Racing, I want to give my congratulations to them. A well-deserved victory, and really establishing themselves as the kings of endurance sports car racing in America right now, and in IMSA. It was a phenomenal race. I want to credit the drivers, Scott Dixon, Ryan Briscoe, Kamui Kobayashi, one of the most criminally underrated race car drivers ever, if you ask me. The man raced in Formula One, never got the break he deserved. I think he's absolutely one of the best drivers in the world. And Ringer van der Zande. Just a great drive by all four of them, and a well-deserved victory. And the Rolex did make history this year as well. The most laps ever completed. So the lap times were down faster than ever. Really, really great race. And NBC's coverage, like I said last year, I feel like it's a little NASCAR heavy, but I appreciate all the people they bring down to Daytona for the race. I appreciate their dedication to motorsports. I have to say, though, I do not understand the decision to air the race, well, to be honest, any of the race on the app, but specifically the 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. hour on Saturday night. Was not on big NBC. I understand that prime time. It also wasn't on NBCSN. It was only available streaming on the app, or if you had access to Track Pass, NBC Sports Gold, which I have access to, so I was able to watch it, but I know a lot of people weren't. And I know that's the primetime viewing hour. So if you don't have that subscription, or if you don't have the app, you were left in the dark for 5 hours during the time where the most amount of people for your viewing audience was available. So that's something I think needs to be looked at. I understand putting 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. on the app, but again, I don't know why you would need to, because what else is going on at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. that you need to prioritize, but I don't know. I don't work for NBC. I don't make those decisions. Maybe there's a reason that I don't know of, but I feel like that would have helped the ratings a little bit. But coverage-wise, for what I did see, I thought it was a solid job. So I'll give them credit where it's due there. Let's get into the NASCAR news and stock car racing news, I guess, from the last couple of weeks down at Daytona. I'll start with the ARCA race. First and foremost, I want to congratulate Michael Self of Venturini Motorsports. Picking up right where he left off. He had a great season last year and followed that up this year, dominating the ARCA Series race at Daytona. You also probably heard, if you're a race fan, that Hailie Deegan finished second. You might not have heard that Michael Self won the race, but credit where it's due. Hailie Deegan absolutely shined in her debut. She had one incident with Chuck Hires that I think was just, again, a case of his super speedway racing, bump drafting gone wrong. I'm sure there was no malicious intent behind it. We all know, obviously, Hailie Deegan is an aggressive driver. I don't want to completely brush that under the rug, but I do think she's going to continue to gain experience and learn from that. But I also want to go back to this idea here that I knew it was coming. I knew, refreshing my feed, that NBC was going to post something. They posted a picture of Hailie mentioning that she tied the record for best finish by a woman in the ARCA Racing Series. That record now jointly held with Shauna Robinson and Aaron Crocker. And then they posted a picture of her family, Brian and Marissa Deegan, coming to celebrate with her on pit road. And it was only after people in the comments were asking who won the race, and I mean, sarcastically, I assume. I think everybody following along knows who won the race, but where's the post for Michael Self? Then they said, oh, by the way, Michael Self won the race. And again, something I've said multiple times on this show. Don't get me wrong. What Hailie Deegan did in the ARCA race deserves to be mentioned, deserves to be talked about, deserves to be credited. It's a major achievement to tie that record. But I don't think that should come at expense of the rest of the series or the winner of the race. Michael Self drove a great race. He did a good job. I feel like he deserves just as much credit. So I'm not going to continue to beat a dead horse here, but you all know my opinion on that. Want to give my congratulations to Venturini and Michael Self. I'm sure they're in for a great season, and it'll be interesting to see how Deegan continues to do. You remember a couple of years ago, Natalie Decker had a top 5 at Daytona and then only had one top 5 the rest of the year. So I don't think success at Daytona is necessarily indicative of how a driver's going to do the rest of the season. But it is a great start to Deegan in her ARCA career, so we'll see where that goes. Want to talk about the Clash, the Busch Clash. Honestly, I could probably do a whole 20-minute monologue on this race as well. Much of the same issue that I have with plate racing again. It has essentially become a test session for the first 80% of the race, and then a demolition derby for the last 20%. We saw pretty much just the same single file parade that we saw last year for almost all the race until lap 61, when there was a 3-car accident with the Penske teammates getting together. And then we had a restart and another crash, a restart and another crash, and so on and so forth, until it got to the point where Austin Dillon was literally the only car in the field without any significant damage. And even he had done kind of a half spin trying to avoid an accident. And there was one crash in particular I could not believe. Again, we call these guys the best drivers in the world. They didn't even make it back to the start-finish line before they crashed again. They're going highway speed, coming to a restart, and people just get so aggressive, or so, I don't know. It's things like this that I think are, quite frankly, embarrassing for the sport, for potential new viewers watching to see this. It's a major problem. And again, it goes back to this idea. I mean, obviously, the drivers haven't clashed. It's an exhibition race. Most of the teams are the powerhouses, well funded, but that doesn't change the fact that it's massively expensive. And if you see the car, that Eric Jones won with, I know I'm definitely getting my diecast pre-order in for that, because that is, man, Lionel's gonna have a fun time with that one. I'll tell you that. That car looked like it was ready for the dumpster, as Mike Joyce said as he was crossing the line. And, there were, anybody other than Dillon who would have won that race would have had similar damage somewhere else on their car. So there were only 6 or 7 cars left running at the end. And I don't think that's a good look. I think the Clash has really suffered in recent years. I like what they've done a little bit to kind of go back to how it used to be. But I still think it works best as a sprint race. 75 laps is way too long, especially when you have an intermission in the middle of it. I like that it's back in daytime. I like that we're putting pole winners back in the field as the primary means of eligibility, but that should be the only means of eligibility. I don't care if you won the Daytona 500 3 years ago. You want to race at Daytona. This race is at Daytona. Okay, we'll let you race the Clash to up the car count a little bit. I don't like that. Back in the day, it used to be part of the pride that drivers felt when they won a pole during the Cup Series season. It's like, oh, I'm in the Clash at Daytona next year. It's the same way a driver today, if they win a race, it's like, oh, I'm in the All-Star race. It meant something. And I think all the format changes that the Clash has gone through, this exhibition race has gone through, to the point where the name was changed to the Shootout with Budweiser sponsorship and the Unlimited with Sprint sponsorship, and all the sponsorship changes. I'm glad that Busch is back so that it's called the Busch Clash again. I think this is an opportunity now to go back to how it was back in the day and run the Clash like it was when NASCAR was at the height of its popularity, and make it an entertaining, enjoyable race, but not a demolition derby like we've seen now each of the last 2 years. It's not fun. It's not entertaining to see the cars going single file for most of the race, and then when the action does pick up, they really can't get started because we're back to square one after every time we have a crash. So if you ask me, the race was pretty much a farce. I guess the memes that are coming from Eric Jones in Victory Lane are worth something at least, but I would like to see the Clash continue to be tweaked until I think the original way NASCAR did it was the best way. So that would be my opinion there. Real quickly, I do want to talk about the Duels. I still call them the twin 125s, even though they're 150 miles now. But again, another race that has gone through constant sponsorship and name changes in recent years. But regardless, better than last year. Fairly competitive dual races. Daniel Suarez for Gaunt Brothers Racing was a pretty high-profile DNQ. So he did not make the Daytona 500. That is the only non-chartered team that has explicitly stated that they are attempting to do the full schedule this year, despite the fact that they don't have a charter. They didn't even make the first race. They'll be guaranteed to make this upcoming race at Las Vegas because only 38 cars are on the entry list. But part of the problem I think we have with the dual races is the car counts are so small now, and this goes back to the whole charter system thing, that 90% of the field's already locked in, so there's not as much question about racing your way into the field as normally. The car counts are so small now, one guy's going to make it, one or two guys are not going to make it. Back in the day, you had 2 transfer spots. I guess you still have 2 transfer spots, but again, the car count and falling back on your speed. I mean, it's a very complicated qualifying process. It honestly takes some studying to understand, and if that's the case, 9 times out of 10, it's too complicated. But back in the day, I remember the first Daytona 500 I watched, 61 cars showed up. And so the dual races were a lot more interesting. There's only 2 spots up for grabs with these drivers that aren't already locked into the show. Who's going to get there? So I don't want to spend too much time talking about the duels again. That's just me beating a dead horse based on the current state that NASCAR's in right now. You know how I feel about all of that. But the races were fairly competitive and entertaining, much better than last year, so I do want to mention those briefly. I want to get into the truck race, and I have to say, probably, for my money, the best race of the week. Jordan Anderson was so close to what would have been an incredibly popular upset for the small single truck team that he owns himself. But Grant Enfinger beat him to the line. Some people said it was a dirty move. I want to agree with you guys, but at the same time, I feel like if the roles had been reversed and that had been Anderson door slamming Enfinger coming to the line while they were still pointed straight, and Anderson had won the race that way, I feel like nobody would be complaining, and we'd all be praising him for doing what he had to do to get the win. So nobody crashed, nobody was relegated further down the order. The truck still came across 1-2, and when that happens, I feel like you can't really blame anybody. Grant Enfinger wanted that win just as much as Jordan Anderson did, and he ultimately got it. Rest of the top 5, a lot of storylines here as well. Codie Rohrbaugh finishing 3rd. Again, very small team. Guy who's not even on social media, kind of flying under the radar, but good to see him get his moment in the spotlight. Last year's, what is now the ARCA Menard Series West, but what was then the K&N Pro Series West, the champion of that series, Derek Kraus, finished 4th, easily his best career finish. A good night for him. And the interesting thing about Kraus is he is actually running the full schedule this year with McAnally's race team. Bill McAnally Racing is, for the first time in almost 2 decades, attempting to run the full truck series schedule. So I know I'm certainly a Derek Kraus fan. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see how he does this year, and I'm wishing him nothing but the best. Natalie Decker. Decker's gotten a lot of comments on social media for how accident-prone she's been, and how people think and I would tend to agree with this, that she was rushed to the truck series far too soon before she was ready. She got a top 5, and she ran her race beautifully. Great strategy to stay at the back for most of the race, stay out of trouble, and then make her move at the end, and ultimately it worked out for her, and she came home 5th, and in the process, she broke Jennifer Jo Cobb's record, which was set in the Daytona truck race 9 years ago, for best finish by a female driver in the truck series. So Decker now holds that record. Congratulations to her. She's running a partial schedule this year with Nice Motorsports. Nice had a great year with Ross Chastain last year, but this was news to me. I heard on the broadcast that they are no longer aligned with GMS Racing, so given how strong GMS is, I feel like that's a pretty big loss. But we'll see how Nice does this year. I think it's going to be an interesting story to follow. The Xfinity Series, I don't have a whole lot to say about this race. Noah Gragson scored his first win. I want to give credit there and make sure I mention that. The main thing I want to talk about in Xfinity is a controversial driver change that happened after qualifying. Now, Colleague Racing had some mechanical issues in qualifying. 2 of their 3 cars were not locked in, and unfortunately for them, they were 2 of their cars had mechanical trouble, and they were the 2 that were not locked into the field. Justin Hailie qualified 3rd, so clearly he had no issues, but AJ Allmendinger and Ross Chastain both had brake issues. I believe Allmendinger's brakes were partially locked, which at a track where you're running wide open, doesn't take a genius to recognize that is not ideal. And Ross Chastain's brakes were partially on fire. Neither of them ultimately ran fast enough to qualify for the race. Now, Allmendinger is running a partial schedule, so Colleague went ahead and said, all right, it's disappointing, but it is what it is. But Ross Chastain is running full-time for a championship. Now, Chastain, I don't know if I'm assuming this was not his decision. I mean, I know it fully wasn't his decision. I don't know how much input he had. But he and his team, Colleague Racing, decided to buy out a ride. And what I mean by that is they went to Ryan Sieg's team and went to Jeff Green, who's a veteran driver, the 2000 Xfinity Series champion. He's made a name for himself among the underdogs and fans of Start and Park teams for how often he start and parks these days. Jeff was only scheduled to do 3 races this year, 2 races at Daytona and Talladega, the super speedway races, and he had funding for all 3 of those. So an opportunity for him to actually go out, be competitive, show what he can do, and honestly have an opportunity to win the race. And yet Jeff Green, and let me say in fairness here to Colleague and Chastain, because I am critical of ride buying, but RSS Racing and Jeff Green did not have to sell this spot to them. And Jeff even mentioned when he was being interviewed that he and Ross Chastain are good friends. And Jeff was more than happy to step aside into the role of a crew chief for this race and let Ross take his place. But I would be a little bit more understanding about this if the rule for the playoffs were you had to start every race to maintain your playoff eligibility. And I had people replying to me and coming to me and saying, well, Ben, I know it's frustrating, but they're doing what they have to do, because if Ross doesn't start this race, then he's not going to be eligible in the playoffs, and there goes his championship before the green flag even drops at Daytona. And that's not the rule. That is not the rule. The rule is that you only have to attempt to qualify for every race. And Kraus even mentioned this after 500 qualifying. Now, I don't know if Gaunt Brothers Racing has a shot at the championship, but theoretically, Daniel Suarez is still playoff eligible in the Cup Series. Even though he missed the Daytona 500, he showed up to the track. He attempted to qualify for the race. He ultimately didn't. But that is all you need to do. You need to attempt to run the full schedule or have a waiver by NASCAR, or granted to you by NASCAR, in order to maintain your eligibility. So had Ross Chastain and colleagues decided, tough luck, we'll go get him at Vegas next week, we're not going to buy a ride, had they made that decision, they would still be playoff eligible. And given how colleague has looked in recent years, the strides that they've made, winning 2 races last year, one of them by Chastain, I think I would certainly not bet against him winning multiple races. Certainly at least one, I think, is more than probable before the playoffs begin. So I don't know if this would have been an issue anyway. I still think, Chastain is a good driver. If all he does is, and because the field is so shallow now, this is the other thing, that points are not going to be an issue. Missing one race is not going to kill Ross Chastain in the points to the point where he's not going to be able to catch up. Because you have to win a race, but also be at a certain ranking in the point standings overall to be playoff eligible as well. But that was not going to be an issue for Ross. The main thing that Ross needs to do is go out and get a win. So missing this one race was not going to hurt him, and like I said, I'm not a fan of ride buying in general, but I would have been a little bit more understanding of it and a little bit less critical. And I'm a Chastain fan, don't get me wrong. I mean, heck, check out the profile picture for my show on Twitter and Instagram. It's me meeting him at Dover. I'm a big Ross Chastain fan. I like his story. I like his passion and his determined style of driving to do whatever it takes to continue to work up the ladder. But I'm going to be fair here. I don't like this move. And again, I don't know that it was entirely him or how much of him it was, period. But you didn't need to do it to stay playoff eligible. And to be honest, another thing people were saying is, they have Nutrient Ag Solutions, their sponsor. You got to keep the sponsors happy. I don't feel like that would have been a problem. If you think back to James Hinchcliffe getting bumped at the Indy 500, which, by the way, the Indy 500, much bigger of a race on the global motorsport scale than an Xfinity race at Daytona. When Hinchcliffe missed the show, Arrow not only did not stop sponsoring Hinchcliffe, Arrow doubled down on their sponsorship and started sponsoring Hinchcliffe's teammate as well the following season. So this idea that we have to keep the sponsors happy, keep Nutrient in the race, I don't feel like that would have been, again, I'm not involved with the team, I don't know, but I don't feel like that would have been a deal breaker. I don't think that was necessary to do to keep funding coming into a race team from their sponsors. And ironically enough, I feel like, Ross Chastain, he's a big name in the Xfinity Series right now. He would have gotten some press anyway, but he got even more press because he missed the race than he would have had he had the issue, but still managed to qualify in the back of the pack and only squeak his way into the field, and they've been able to fix the issue, and then he goes on in the race anyway. Nutrien got even more because he missed the race. So it's something I'm not a fan of, something I wanted to point out, but in fairness, RSS Racing agreed to it. They didn't have to, so just a story that I wanted to bring up and give my opinion on. Not a big fan of it, but it is what it is. Real quick, before we go off the air here, do want to give a brief summary of the Cup race because it was a massive deal. President Trump announced earlier this week that he was going to not only be attending the 500, but be the Grand Marshal, give the command to start engines. And then, I don't know how impromptu this was. I don't remember hearing about it before it actually happened, but his limo took a lap around the track. President Trump paced the field in the Daytona 500. And you know me. I'm not a very political man. I try not to discuss politics too much, but I saw one of my friends send a tweet out that said, the same people, conservatives who cry in the NFL that we have to keep politics out of sports, it's amusing to me that they're loving this. And respectfully, I would have to say I think this is a bit different. President Trump was not at Daytona to make a political statement one way or the other, or to start a movement, or give a speech, or start a rally, or whatever. He was there to do a job, take part in the ceremonies, and then pace the track. And for the President of the United States, regardless of how you feel about him, to be there, of all the things he could be doing on a Sunday afternoon, to spend time with NASCAR in Daytona Beach, I think is awesome. And Fox released the ratings. Some people were expecting it to turn off some viewers. I'm sure it did, but evidently it drew a lot of viewers in as well, because kills me that we had the race postponed because of rain, because the ratings for the coverage on Sunday were well above last year's. I know last year we were talking about how they were up slightly, and then the adjusted ratings came in, and then turned out they were down slightly, so it was basically a wash. They were up massively this year, which is great. I'm sure the Trump effect certainly helped that. But then the rain came, and we didn't even get to, right as the pace car was about to turn left down pit road and Dale Jr. was about to wave the green flag, the rain opened up. The track was not lost, quote unquote. Track drying did not take too long, so the drivers got back in their cars, did 20 laps, and then the rain came back, and that's all she wrote. I would have liked to have seen the race restarted around 10:30 or 11. Given how the forecast played out, Daytona has lights, and people have work on Monday. I know it was President's Day, but a lot of people had work on Monday, and if they didn't, they likely had to leave Monday so that they could get home on Tuesday, because they probably had work on Tuesday regardless, if they had President's Day off or not. So, my heart hurts for the fans that make all these plans and spend a lot of money to come down to Daytona only to see 20 laps and then have to go home because the race is postponed. And I'm going to touch on this very, very briefly. Not a fan of the start times or the postponement restart time. I would like to see the 500 start sometime around noon or 1. I think late in the afternoon. I get that Fox wants a primetime finish. I'm sure that helps the ratings a little bit, but I feel like NASCAR as an organization needs to step in and say, this is when we're starting the race. If you want to broadcast it, you can. If not, you won't. I feel like it's in their right to do that, and I feel that an earlier start time would be the most beneficial, particularly this time of year in Florida, given how the weather can tend to be. But those are my feelings on that. As I mentioned at the start of the show, Denny Hamlin won. Joe Gibbs Racing, their second consecutive Daytona 500, third in the last 5 years, which is absolutely incredible. When you think of the style of plate racing, again, not that there's no skill involved, but that a lot of drivers, if they work the draft right, can win if they avoid accidents. Denny Hamlin is showing that he is one of, if not the best super speedway racers in NASCAR right now. So a well-deserved victory for him. And that's really all I've got for tonight. I just want to leave you guys, again, extending my thoughts and prayers to Ryan Newman and his family and asking that you all do the same. Like I said, if you missed the beginning of the show, the latest update from Roush is that Newman is awake and alert at Halifax Medical Center in Daytona Beach, speaking with his doctors, which is the best possible news we could have at this point, but we don't have any further updates. All I ask is that, like I said, you continue to pray and think for his family, but please do not spread any rumors that you hear from anybody on social media. Only trust direct sources or sources of highly credible and highly respected journalists. Anything else, just don't even believe it. Wait for updates to come when Newman and his family or his race team or whoever have something to say. They will say it. That's going to be it for this week's edition of the Photo Finish. We're going to see you guys next week, same time, same place. NASCAR's in Las Vegas. We'll cover all the action from there. And we're going to sign off now. Have a good night, everyone. Congratulations again to Denny Hamlin, and our thoughts and prayers are with Ryan Newman and his family.